wherever you are in the world tonight. I'm grateful you're here. Tell me softly, where are you watching from? And what time is it, right now, in your part of the night? I always find it comforting to begin like this. A quiet moment, a gentle voice, and a story that doesn't ask anything of you, except to listen. Take a breath with me, and let the night settle in. The road to Greywick House wasn't marked, just a break in the hedgerow and a rusted gate leaning slightly toward the sea. Twilight had already pulled its shawl across the fields when Clara arrived. The air smelled of old hay and wet stone. Somewhere nearby, a heron let out a slow, hollow call, the kind that echoed longer than it should have. She paused at the gate. The iron was cold and patterned with lichen, the hinges dressed in cobweb. A crest was carved at the center, a bird, maybe, or a key with wings. It was hard to tell in this light. Clara didn't remember the house clearly, only letters, soft, peculiar things, from an aunt who'd never visited but always wrote in deep green ink. And now, Miriam was gone. The house had passed to Clara. No will, no solicitor, just a key wrapped in velvet and a note in that same green ink. You'll understand once you're inside. The house remembered. She stepped through the gate slowly. The gravel path crackled underfoot. Tall grasses leaned in like listeners. Greywick stood on a slight rise, windows dark, roof dipped in shadow. There was something almost expectant about it. Not ominous, not welcoming, just watching. At the front door, she hesitated. Not from fear, but from something quieter. Like déjà vu, but softer. Like standing in a dream before the dream remembered you were there. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. The latch turned, and the house exhaled. Inside, the stillness was thick. Dust hung in the air like memory. She lit a small candle from her bag, a travel tin she always carried, and the flame painted the hallways in amber and shadow. Each step creaked gently beneath her boots. The house wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. The wallpaper had a floral pattern, tiny violets and curling vines. The grandfather clock had stopped at 11:13. A stack of books rested beside a chair as if someone had just stepped out of the room. She explored slowly. A study filled with old maps. A parlor with an oil lamp still half full. A kitchen with teacups placed on the sill like they'd been left there to dry in another century. Upstairs, her room was already made. Floral quilt, white curtains, a single candle in a brass dish. And resting on the pillow, not folded, not hidden, was a sheet of paper. It read, "Don't open the door upstairs." No name, no signature, no explanation. She looked toward the far end of the hall. The candlelight didn't quite reach that far, but she could make out the outline of a door, narrower than the others, almost hidden. She placed the note on the nightstand. The flame flickered once, and the house held still. Somewhere behind the walls, a soft ticking began. Not from the broken clock, not from any room she could see. Just a sound, like something remembering how to move again. The candle burned low by morning, leaving a soft curve of wax cooled against the brass plate. Clara stirred just after dawn, though the sky outside still wore the grey hush of early fog. She sat up slowly, listening. There was no sound, no pipes, no creaks, no bird song. Only that same quiet that didn't feel empty. Just patient. She dressed in layers, still wearing the travel chill in her arms. Then she walked the hall. The upper floor held 6 rooms in a row, 4 with doors left open and fading wallpaper visible from the threshold. One was a linen closet. Another, a small room with a vanity and a cracked mirror. The rest felt ordinary, even cozy in their way, except for the door at the very end. It was the only one that had no dust. The other doors bore a fine veil of neglect. Across the knobs, the hinges, the panels where fingers might have brushed over decades. But this one was clean, as though someone had opened it recently, or someone still did. Clara paused in front of it. She didn't touch it. Not yet. She only noticed the details. The frame was slightly narrower than the others, just enough that it felt out of place. The knob was older, dull brass, without the painted porcelain center the others had. And something else. The door was warm, not hot, not glowing, just faintly warm to the touch, like someone had rested a hand there only moments before. She turned and walked back downstairs. The kitchen was quiet, but not cold. The kettle sat on the old iron stove, just where she'd left it the night before. She lit the burner and waited, fingers wrapped around the cool porcelain of a mug left behind by her aunt. The house didn't feel haunted. Not in the way she expected. There were no creaks that sounded like footsteps. No mirrors that blinked when she didn't, but it did feel aware. Like a place that noticed where your eyes paused. Like it paid attention to the rhythm of your breathing. Like it remembered which floorboards had carried your weight and which ones didn't. She found the study again and opened the curtains. Outside, the reeds had bent under the weight of morning dew. The distant sea flickered like slate brushed with candlelight. And in the window's reflection, she thought she saw the door upstairs again. Just for a second. Just behind her. But she hadn't been looking at the hallway. She'd been looking at the water. She turned dash. But there was no one there. The day passed slowly. She opened boxes, sorted through books, found a leather-bound journal in a drawer that hadn't been locked, though it felt like it should have been. Inside were sketches, not of people, not of places, just doors, one after another, narrow ones, crooked ones, doors with extra locks, doors with no handles at all, and one, sketched faintly near the end, looked just like the one at the end of the hall. Next to it, in faint handwriting, was a note. It opens when it remembers you. That night, Clara stood in the hallway again. The house was quiet, but not still. A breeze moved through the cracks. The wallpaper whispered in places she couldn't see. She stood before the door, and for a moment thought she heard breathing, but couldn't tell if it was hers. She didn't touch the handle. Not yet, just listened and waited. Because something on the other side was waiting too. It rained through the morning. not heavily, but steadily. Like a conversation the sky was having with itself. Clara listened from the downstairs study, where the windows fogged gently and the smell of wet stone crept in through the old frame. The fire had gone out overnight, leaving only the scent of cooled ash and cedar. She didn't light it again. Instead, she traced her finger over the edge of Miriam's desk, a roll-top antique, still lined with dried lavender and yellowing stamps. The drawers opened with quiet sighs. Most held what you'd expect: old letters, dried pens, notebooks full of odd to-do lists written in ink so faded it looked like smoke. But the third drawer on the left was locked. It was the only one that didn't open with a simple tug, and the only one that sounded like it shouldn't be opened at all. She leaned closer. The keyhole was small, oval-shaped, and just inside she thought she saw a bit of red thread tangled on the inner latch. She searched the house. Not urgently, just slowly, as though the key would appear only when she stopped expecting it. And that's exactly how it happened. The pantry off the kitchen had a shelf too high to reach without the little step stool. She wasn't looking for anything, just trying to remember where Miriam used to keep the tea. But there it was. A key, tied with red thread, resting in the lip of an old teacup, turned upside down. No label, no tag, just the soft curve of brass and the faintest curve of oxidation where it had been handled many times before. It fit the desk on the first try. Inside the drawer was a journal, not one like the others. This one was wrapped in waxed cloth, tied with a loop of leather. When Clara opened it, the smell of cedar and rose oil drifted out like memory. Each page was written in a different hand, some neat, some slanted, some scribbled in what looked like distress, but all with dates. They stretched back decades, maybe more. Some from the 1970s, some from long before that, and the entries weren't addressed to anyone. They were instructions. If the door begins humming, burn lavender beneath the hinge. Do not speak to the voice if it asks for your name. The third knock is never real. Let it pass. If the room upstairs opens on its own, close your eyes. Do not look at the walls. Clara read them all, slowly, a page at a time. She didn't panic. Not exactly. But she did feel the house change, not its shape, not its sound, its attention. It felt like something in the walls had started listening more carefully. That night she returned to the hallway. The door was still closed, still warm beneath her fingertips. But now she noticed something else. A faint scent, like rose oil and burnt paper, just at the base of the door frame. She stepped back. The journal sat on the bedside table now, its pages closed, but its presence louder than before. Clara turned down the bed, blew out the candle, and lay awake, listening, not for footsteps, not for voices, but for the humming the journal had warned her about, and somewhere had just past sleep. She thought she heard it. The flame was still alive when Clara woke, a small, steady flicker in the brass dish, though she was sure she had blown it out. Morning light hadn't touched the curtains yet, but the candle glowed, faintly, like it had never stopped burning, only waited. She sat up slowly, careful not to shift the blanket too hard. The room was quiet, and yet something about the quiet had changed. It no longer felt like absence. It felt like observation. She reached for the candle, but stopped. There was wax spilled over the lip, soft and warm, as though someone had lit it again, recently. Not her, not in sleep. Someone, or something, had wanted it burning. She listened. Nothing, but the silence. It listened back. Downstairs, the fog outside still clung to the windows. The sea was invisible behind the mist. Only the sound of slow, salt-thick waves reached the edges of the house. Clara made tea. She moved like someone inside someone else's memory, opening drawers, filling the kettle, touching things that remembered other hands. She carried the tea into the study and opened the journal again. The entry had changed. Same page, same handwriting, but the ink was still wet. If the candle stays lit without cause, do not snuff it. Let it burn. The light is borrowed. She touched the edge of the page. The ink smudged slightly at the corner, and beneath that entry, newly added, another line appeared as she watched. You're not alone anymore. She closed the journal. Not from fear, not exactly, but from a sudden weight in her chest. Something in this house was beginning to wake. And it was aware of her now. She thought of leaving, packing her things, locking the door behind her. But something deeper than thought, something older, whispered that it wouldn't matter. The door wouldn't be locked behind her. The house would follow. That afternoon, she found the first photograph. It was tucked between the pages of a novel left in the parlor. A story about long winters and quiet inheritances. She hadn't opened it before. Inside, resting loosely between chapters, was a sepia photograph. It showed the upper hallway, the one outside her bedroom, clearly aged, with wallpaper that hadn't yet peeled and a rug she hadn't seen before. But what made her breath slow was the figure. A woman, standing just in front of the far door. The locked one, looking away from the camera. She was wearing something plain, a high collar, long sleeves, hands clasped at her waist. Her posture was still, too still, and on the back in faded pencil, "Don't forget, she watches from the other side." That night, Clara didn't sleep right away. The candle was still burning. She didn't touch it. She didn't move it. She left it there, just as the journal had said. The house made no noise. Not even the creak of heat in the pipes or the scratch of wind against glass. Only the soft hum of flame and the echo of someone standing behind a door holding their breath. She turned away, closed her eyes, and whispered into the silence. Not to anyone, but to the house itself. "What do you want from me?" No answer came, but the candle flared, then softened again, as if it had heard her. The morning arrived without sunlight, just a dim pewter sky pressing gently against the windows. Clara woke to the same candle, still burning. The wick had shortened, but the flame remained steady. as if time meant something different here. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, listening. The house didn't speak, but it didn't need to. Every quiet hallway, every darkened corner, felt like breath held in the lungs of something ancient. She brought the photograph downstairs, placed it gently on the writing desk in the study. The woman in the image hadn't changed, of course. But Clara noticed something she hadn't the night before. A faint shadow on the floor beside her. Not from the window, not from her own body. It stood beside her, tall, undefined, with no source. Clara touched the edge of the photograph. The paper was brittle, but warm. She turned it over again. The words remained the same. Don't forget, she watches from the other side. The journal was still on the table. She hadn't opened it since the message had written itself the day before. She wasn't sure if it would again. She wasn't sure she wanted it to. But curiosity, that slow, heavy kind that creeps in when you're tired, took over. She untied the loop of leather and flipped through the pages. Nothing had changed. Until she reached the back, a page had been added. Rough paper, stitched in crudely. A different color, older. There, written in hand so small it looked etched with a needle. You are not the first. The woman was once a guest. She stayed too long, and then the house remembered her. The words felt colder than the paper. Clara closed the journal and stepped outside. The air smelled of salt and iron. The garden had begun reclaiming itself. Vines curling over stone, wild roses climbing the trellis in strange, half-patterned shapes. She followed a narrow trail around the side of the house, and there, under the kitchen window, she found a broken frame. Wood rotted, glass cracked. It must have once held something, but whatever it was had been removed. Only a single, rusted nail remained in the center. There was something scrawled beneath the nail, barely visible under the dirt. She knelt down and brushed it with her sleeve. She was warned. Back inside, the candle had gone out. The room felt dimmer than it had that morning, like the light had been drawn into the floorboards and held there. Clara lit a match, but it sputtered. Tried another. The flame caught, then vanished again. Something didn't want fire. Not now. She sat beside the bed and opened the drawer. The photograph was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. In its place lay a single violet. Pressed flat. No stem. No scent. And below it, a single slip of paper. Some guests never leave. Some are remembered too well. That night, the candle would not light. No matter how many matches she struck, the wick would catch, then fade into smoke. She left it there and lay down, but she didn't sleep, because somewhere in the hallway, the door had started humming again, and from the other side, she swore she heard a second breath, one that wasn't hers. The hallway was dark, but not silent. Something had shifted in the night. Not loudly, not with a crash or a creak, just enough to be felt. Like a thought half remembered, or a breath that didn't belong to you. Clara stood barefoot in the upstairs hall, candle unlit in her hand, listening to the door at the far end. It hummed. Not a sound, exactly. More like the faint thrum of something pulsing on the other side. Alive, but dreaming. She reached for the handle. Not to turn it, just to feel if it was still warm. It was. Warmer than ever. She pulled her hand back slowly, not out of fear, but reverence. The kind of stillness you feel before crossing into sacred ground, or leaving something behind. She returned to her room and lit the lamp instead. It took a few tries. When the flame finally caught, it flickered blue at the edges. She watched it dance. Then opened the journal again. This time, the new entry was waiting, already written, already dry. The door knows when you dream about it. And below it, in smaller script, if it breathes back, do not speak your name. She barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of staircases that looped in on themselves. Rooms with no windows, mirrors that blinked. In the dream, the woman from the photograph stood at the end of the hall, her face never visible, her hands always clasped. And behind her, a voice that didn't sound like any voice at all whispered, "You're starting to remember." When Clara woke, the candle had burned down to the base. Even though it hadn't lit the night before, the wick was curled, the wax clean, as if it had been burning somewhere else and only returned here to cool. She walked the house. Something was different now. Not just in the air, but in the arrangement of things. A teacup had been moved, a chair turned slightly toward the window. The grandfather clock was ticking. She hadn't touched it, hadn't wound it, but now it counted softly, a slow metronome in the quiet of the front room. 11, 14, 3 dots. The hands didn't match the chimes, and the pendulum swung slower than it should have. She watched it, noted the rhythm, and realized it was breathing. She returned to the hallway after noon. Sunlight filtered in faintly through the curtain lace, but it didn't reach the final door. That section of the hallway remained in shadow, not thick, just untouched. She stood in front of the door again. The hum was stronger now. She could feel it in her teeth, behind her eyes, and when she placed her hand on the door frame, not the handle this time, the wood seemed to exhale, not air, not warmth, but memory. A feeling that passed through her like someone else's dream. She stepped back. That night she didn't even try to light a candle. She left the lamp dim. She placed the journal on the pillow beside her, and before closing her eyes, she whispered, not to herself, not to the house, but into the stillness, "I don't want to forget." No voice answered, but the grandfather clock ticked once more, even though its hands had stopped again. And somewhere upstairs, the door exhaled. The sound returned just before dawn, not loud, not urgent, just the soft click of gears turning, behind glass that hadn't moved in years. Clara lay still beneath the blanket, eyes open, watching the shadowed ceiling. The grandfather clock downstairs was ticking again, and this time it was keeping time, accurate, measured, but slow, too slow. as if the seconds were being stretched or remembered. She rose without lighting the lamp. The morning light was faint, fog-blurred and silvery, like the color of a memory you're not sure belongs to you. Her bare feet found the stairs, each step a whisper. When she reached the parlor, the clock was already waiting. It stood just where it had always been, but taller somehow. Or maybe the ceiling had lowered, or the room had leaned toward it. The glass was clean, the hands were in motion. The pendulum swung, not side to side, but forward and back, deeper than it should, as if it swung into the wall, into something behind the wall. She opened the case. There was a note folded behind the weights, a square of yellowed paper tucked in like it had been resting, not hidden. She unfolded it. Some time must be wound by hand, but some time winds itself when watched. There was no signature, no date, only a small pressed flower taped to the corner. A violet. Clara didn't speak aloud, didn't ask questions, just listened. The clock ticked on, but now she heard something else. Behind it. Not in it. Behind it. The hollow sound of space. A gap in the wall. Maybe even a room. She ran her fingers around the back of the wooden frame, careful not to shift the weight, and there, just beneath the baseboard, she felt it. An edge. A seam. A faint draft. She spent the rest of the morning gathering supplies, a flashlight, a pencil and paper, the journal, a scarf she hadn't worn since the train ride north. She waited until dusk. There was something about the in-between light, when day folds into night and neither has claimed the hour. That made her feel less alone. She returned to the clock and pressed her hand against the wood. It moved. Only slightly. Just enough. A faint click. And the front of the clock swung forward, revealing a narrow space behind it. A hidden door. Not large, but wide enough to pass through sideways if she turned her shoulders. It smelled of old plaster and sea air. Inside, darkness. But not empty. The sound came again. Not ticking, breathing. She didn't enter. Not yet. She stepped back, heart steady but slowed, the way it does when you're standing at the edge of something sacred. She left the passage open. Just a little. Enough to let the house know. She'd found it, and tomorrow she would return. The house waited, not impatiently, but with the quiet anticipation of something that had been holding its breath for a very long time. Clara returned just after sunrise, tea still warm in her hands, a scarf around her shoulders, even though the morning was mild. The grandfather clock stood still now. No ticking, no motion, as if it had never moved at all, but the space behind it was still open, still breathing. She slipped inside sideways, flashlight in one hand, the journal tucked under her arm. The passage was narrow, not tight, just close. The walls were plaster, painted the same sea-washed gray as the rest of the house, but chipped, as though this hallway hadn't been seen by light in decades. At the end of the corridor was a small room. No windows, no lights, just the soft weight of still air. She clicked on the flashlight. Dust stirred in the beam, not violently, but with the slow grace of something used to being undisturbed. There was furniture, a writing desk, a chair with a blanket still folded over the back, a low bookshelf, half empty, and pinned to the far wall. Dozens of notes, all handwritten, all different hands. She stepped closer. Some were journal entries. Some were warnings. Some were apologies. I didn't mean to open the door. I only wanted to knock. If the humming gets louder, leave the house for 3 days. The voice knows your name even if you don't say it. Be careful with your thoughts. Others were more cryptic. She remembers you, even if you don't remember her. Time loops, but the echo fades slower than the sound. When you dream of her, don't follow. She walks in circles. Clara stood still, then reached for the center note. It was pinned by a small, rusted key. The paper was folded. She opened it slowly and read just 4 words. The room is listening. She turned off the flashlight, stood in darkness, not to be brave, but to feel what the house felt. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of breath, thought, attention, something old and lonely, but not cruel. She whispered, barely aloud, "What are you waiting for?" No reply, but the air moved near her ear. Not wind, not breath, just a ripple, as though the room had heard her and didn't know how to answer. She stepped back out into the corridor. The passage behind the clock felt colder now. Not dangerous, just deeper. She closed the clock cabinet behind her, and as she did, something clicked again. She checked the face of the grandfather clock. The hands had moved. They now read 2:17, the exact time she had found the journal. She touched the glass. It was warm, not from the sun, from memory. That night she sat in bed with the journal open. The candle flickered at her side, no longer fighting to stay lit, and just beneath the margin, in a new, crooked scroll, "She knows you found the room. Don't forget the key." That night, the storm returned. Not a loud one, just rain. Soft, steady, constant, like fingers tracing the windows, or a lullaby hummed from another room. Clara listened from her chair beside the bed. The journal lay open on her lap, untouched since the last message. She hadn't responded, didn't write anything back. It felt like writing would invite something closer, and for now, she wasn't sure she wanted closer, but the candle beside her burned low. The same flame that had resisted her now welcomed her. It had learned her rhythm, and the room had too. The sound came just before midnight. From under the floorboards, not scratching, not footsteps, a voice, not words, just shape, like someone trying to remember how language worked, how vowels tasted, how breath formed questions. She leaned forward, listening, held her own breath to hear better, and then, only once, a sound she couldn't explain. Her name. Not spoken aloud, but placed, softly, carefully, like a memory folded into her pillow. She rose slowly, lit the lamp, and crossed the room. Kneeling near the foot of the bed, she pressed her hand against the wooden boards. Cool, but not still. A soft vibration pulsed beneath her palm, like breath or a quiet heartbeat, or the ticking of a second clock. She whispered down, "I hear you." The hum stopped. The wood quieted. And somewhere beneath the house, something shifted its weight. In the study the next morning, the clock had stopped again, its hands frozen at 3:42, a time Clara didn't recognize. She turned to the journal, flipped through the pages slowly until one fluttered loose. Not a page, a letter, folded neatly and placed between entries. Unmarked. She opened it. "If the voice begins to know you, leave the house for one night, return at dawn, and if the clock is ticking again, you may ask your question." Clara folded the letter again. She didn't leave. Instead, she returned to the hidden room behind the clock. This time, the flashlight wasn't needed. The walls glowed faintly, not with light, but memory, as if they had remembered her, welcomed her. A new note was on the desk, fresh ink, still glistening. The voice is not the house. It is what the house kept inside. That night, Clara placed her ear to the floor. No voice, just breathe, rhythmic, deep, like the ocean under boards. And when she finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of staircases beneath staircases, rooms with no walls, and voices that hummed in circular harmony. She woke just before sunrise. The candle was gone. In its place, a key, small, brass, and cold. She picked it up and whispered, "I won't forget." And the floor exhaled. The key stayed with her all morning. She kept it in her pocket as she walked the rooms, fingers wrapped around its shape. Not tightly, but with the quiet awareness of something that might need to be used. It was small, brass, worn smooth, like it had been passed through many hands or held onto for too long. She didn't know what it opened, but the house did. The rain had stopped some time after dawn. The windows were streaked with silver, and the light that filtered through the curtains was soft and uneven, like the day hadn't fully decided what it wanted to be. She sat at the writing desk in the front room, same place she had found the old photograph. The journal lay closed beside her. The key rested gently on top of it. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer, dipped the pen, and began to write. She didn't know who the letter was for, only that it had waited to be written for a very long time. She wrote slowly, line by line. No plan, just memory. She wrote about the clock, the humming door, the hidden room behind the wall. She wrote about the woman in the photograph, how her presence lingered like perfume left too long in the folds of an old coat, and about the voice, the breath beneath the floorboards. She wrote about the house itself, how it seemed to know her rhythms, how it felt not haunted, but haunted by her. When she finished, she didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. She folded the page carefully, pressed the crease flat, and looked around the room. There was no envelope, no drawer labeled "Letters Never Sent." no inkling of where it was meant to go. But something tugged at her gently, like a thread behind the wallpaper. She left the desk and walked to the upstairs hallway. The humming door was still, the hallway quiet. She passed it and moved toward the linen cupboard just before the stairs. She didn't know why, only that her feet carried her there. Inside, tucked between two folded blankets, was a narrow wooden box, long, thin, unlocked. She opened it. Inside were dozens of folded papers, each different handwriting, different paper. Some were stained, some perfectly preserved, each one unlabeled, unsigned. Letters. She placed hers gently on top, closed the lid. And as she did, she heard the clock begin ticking again downstairs. Once, then twice, and then it stopped. She didn't move, just listened. And somewhere beneath the floorboards, soft like the faintest lullaby, the voice hummed. That evening, she lit the lamp and turned to the journal. This time, the message was short. Some letters are received, even when they aren't sent. And beneath it, the key fits what you forgot. She turned the key over in her hand, watched the flame flicker across its worn teeth, then looked toward the end of the hallway. The door wasn't humming, but it was waiting. The hallway was silent. No hum, no draft, only stillness, thick and quiet, like the moment just before snowfall. Clara stood at the far end, the brass key held lightly in her hand. She hadn't planned to approach the door today, hadn't planned anything really. But the house had its own calendar, and some rooms keep their own time. The key felt warmer now, not hot, but held, as though someone had just passed it to her. The door, as always, bore no markings, no knob, only the slight impression of a frame pressed into the wall like a scar. She reached forward and pressed the key into the seam where two panels met. No lock, no click, but the wood softened, breathed, and slowly, without effort, the door unlatched itself. It didn't swing open. It unfolded. A slow exhale. Inside was a room. Not a bedroom, not a study, not anything she could name. It looked like memory, layered, unfixed. The air shimmered faintly. Not like heat, but like something in between presence and imagination. There were chairs, but no dust. Books, but no titles. And in the center of the room, a mirror, oval, framed in iron, covered with cloth. Clara didn't touch it. She stepped around it gently, as if not to wake it. The walls were lined with notes, not pinned like before, painted. Messages written in ink and oil and charcoal, some fresh, some faded so pale she could only read them with her fingertips. She remembered before she saw. The mirror does not reflect. It recalls. If you speak your name in this room, it will echo in the wrong direction. In the far corner sat a small table. Upon it, a single box, velvet-lined, closed. She opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, worn, and unmistakably hers. Only, she'd never seen it before. Not in this life, Not in this house, but it fit her hand perfectly. She didn't put it on. She simply closed the box again and whispered, "I remember, even if I don't know how." And the room pulsed. A ripple of breathless knowing passed through the floor, up the walls, into the mirror. The cloth fluttered, but still, she didn't touch it. As she turned to leave, the door closed behind her on its own. Not sharply, not to trap, just to say, "Now you know." Back in the hallway, she found the journal waiting on the floor. It hadn't been there when she entered. A new line had appeared. She was always meant to find this room, but only once she forgot what it meant. Beneath that, written in softer ink, "The mirror remembers." And under that, a final line, "When you're ready to look, it will let you in." The mirror waited, still covered, still silent, but not asleep. Some objects don't rest. They listen. Clara sat at the desk that morning, fingers tracing the edges of the key. The ring box lay beside her, unopened now. She hadn't put it on, but she kept it close, like something once hers that might return at the right moment. Outside, the sky had folded into mist. The trees were silhouettes, softened by fog, and the house seemed to press inward as if drawing its breath. She lit the lamp and returned to the hidden room. The door unfolded for her this time, as if it knew she was ready to be seen. The air inside was warmer than before. Not cozy, but familiar. The kind of warmth you feel in a dream you've had more than once. The mirror still stood in the center, tall, framed in dark iron that curled like vines. The cloth hadn't moved, but it trembled, as if the mirror were breathing beneath it. Clara stepped closer, not rushed, not brave, just steady. She reached for the cloth and paused. The room didn't stop her, but something inside her did. She waited, took a breath, and then, gently, with 2 fingers, she peeled the cloth back. The mirror did not show her face. Not at first. It showed a hallway. This hallway, only older. The wallpaper was faded, the carpet threadbare. A suitcase sat at the top of the stairs, and a woman stood in front of the mirror. Not Clara, but close. Same eyes, same stillness. She watched as the woman lifted her hand and placed a ring on her finger. The same ring. The image rippled, shifted. Now the mirror showed a bedroom, firelight, shadows. The same woman, older, alone, writing at the desk. A journal. The journal, the entries, were hers. Clara stepped closer. The mirror shimmered again, not like glass, but like water being stirred. This time it showed her. Now in this room, watching herself, but behind her reflection, stood the door, open, and something waiting inside it. She turned sharply. The real door was still closed. Nothing behind her, just air, just breathe. The mirror, however, now held only one thing. A new message, etched faintly in the glass. What you forgot is what you came here to find. And when you remember, don't look away. She backed away slowly, pulled the cloth over the frame again, let the stillness settle. And as she turned to leave, she felt the ring in her pocket, still cold, still waiting, but somehow not entirely hers anymore. That night, the journal offered no new message, only a symbol, drawn faintly in charcoal, a circle, open at one end. Clara touched it and whispered without meaning to, "I've seen this before." She didn't know when or where, but she knew it meant something. Something forgotten, but not lost. That night, the circle appeared again. Not in the journal, but in the frost on the window pane. A delicate arc, open at one side, drawn not by fingers, but by cold memory. Clara traced it lightly with her fingertip. It faded instantly, but its impression lingered in her chest, like a word she hadn't spoken in years. The house had remembered it, and now it wanted her to. The fog outside was thick. Even the moon refused to show itself. Inside, the air felt denser, heavier, not oppressive, just concentrated, like breath held too long. She wandered the upper hallway again, slowly this time, touching door frames, listening for creaks that weren't hers. The humming door stayed quiet. The grandfather clock had stopped again, this time at 12:06. Same as before. It wasn't keeping time anymore. It was marking it. In the morning, she found a folded page beneath her pillow, unlabeled, but not unfamiliar. It was written in the same hand as the others. Not hers. Not quite. A voice from between pages. The message was short. The house forgot her name so she could rest. But now that you've remembered, it may remember her too. Clara stared at the words. Her. Not you. The house hadn't meant her. It meant someone else. She returned to the hidden room. This time, not to look into the mirror, but to look behind it. It took effort to shift it. Not weight, but will. She moved the mirror an inch, then another. And there, carved into the wall behind it, the circle, painted over, then scraped back through, and next to it, barely visible under the layers, a name. Evelyn. The name struck something deep, not recognition, but ache. A name wrapped in loneliness, a name no longer called. Clara whispered it aloud, Evelyn. And the mirror behind her breathed, not reflected, not moved, just acknowledged. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the room smelled of roses and the soft musk of an old scarf, the scent of someone who'd left or never quite arrived. Back in the journal, a new message had appeared. She's not angry, she's just waiting. And below it, written in darker ink, some ghosts don't knock, they wait for someone to let them back in. Clara lit the candle by her bedside, watched the flame shift softly to one side, as if something in the room had breathed out. The wind outside had stilled, but the house was remembering. And sometimes, Memory is more haunting than any ghost. The floor creaked, not beneath her feet, but somewhere ahead. A quiet pressure in the wood, as if someone had stepped forward before her. Clara stood at the top of the stairs, candle in hand, flame steady despite the stillness. She hadn't planned to go further tonight, but the house was guiding her. Or, remembering her path, she passed the humming door, past the grandfather clock, frozen at 12:06, and found herself at the end of the east wing, where the corridor turned cold for no reason at all. The walls narrowed, the floor dipped slightly, the wallpaper changed, a deeper green with a pattern of curling vines she hadn't seen elsewhere. And there it was, a door she'd never noticed. Not new, not hidden, just forgotten. She touched the handle. It was warm, like it had been held only moments ago. No lock, no resistance. The door opened softly, and behind it, a bedroom. Not dust-covered, not untouched. Lived in. The bed was neatly made, blankets folded with care. A book lay open on the nightstand, a pair of reading glasses beside it. There was a sweater, soft and pale, draped over the back of a chair. A scent in the air. Lavender, maybe, or old perfume. Clara stepped inside and felt something shift behind her. Not fear, familiarity, as though she'd walked into a memory that didn't belong to her, but welcomed her anyway. There were photographs on the walls. Most were faded, not by age, but by neglect. Only one stood out, framed in black, perched on the desk beneath the window. A woman with dark eyes, half smiling, looking just past the camera. Not directly at Clara, but close. She'd seen her before. Not in memory. In the mirror. She sat in the chair and opened the drawer beneath the photograph. Inside were letters, stacked neatly, each one sealed, each one addressed to the same name. Clara Evelyn Whitlow. Her own name, but written as if it belonged to someone else or someone before. Her middle name hadn't been spoken in years, not by family, not by her. And yet here it was, etched on every envelope, in the same careful script. She opened one. I tried to forget. I really did. But the house wouldn't let me. It remembers what I can't, or won't. If you're reading this, then you've come back, or forward, or maybe just in again. The letter ended there. No signature, but the paper smelled like lavender. Same as the room. She sat still for a long time, not moving, not needing to. And when she finally stood to leave, she whispered into the empty air, I remember you now. There was no voice in return, no echo, no flicker, just a soft pull of the blanket on the bed, as if someone had just stood up from it. That night, the journal was blank, except for one line written backward at the bottom of the page. This is where you left her. The next morning, Clara didn't wake in her own bed. She woke in that room, the one she wasn't supposed to find. The sheets were warm, the light was dim and amber, as if it hadn't traveled far to reach her. For a moment, she forgot. Not where she was, but when. The scent of lavender still clung to the air, and the sweater was still draped over the chair, just as she had left it. But something had shifted. The photograph on the desk had turned. It now faced the bed. She rose slowly, careful not to disturb whatever silence had settled in the room. The photograph was the same. Same woman, same half-smile, same dark eyes. But now, a faint crack traced through the glass. Not from damage, but time. Like something had tried to reach through from the inside. She touched it gently, and for a breathless instant, the glass felt warm. Not alarming, not haunted, just aware. She searched the drawers again. Same letters, same envelopes, but beneath them, a new object rested. A small, round brooch, brass, unpolished. It bore the same open circle, the symbol she'd seen in the journal and in the frost and behind the mirror. But now it was etched into metal, permanent. She lifted it carefully, and as she held it up to the window, something shimmered through the glass behind her. Not a reflection, not light, a figure, only for a moment. She turned. No one was there, only the scent of roses now, faint and drifting. She pinned the brooch to her collar, not as a statement, but as a connection. Something had begun to align, and the house was no longer whispering, it was listening. Later that day, she sat at the desk with a photograph. This time, she spoke to it. Was this your room or mine? No answer. But the candle beside her flickered once. And the journal, resting closed beside it, opened itself to a new page. One sentence had appeared in careful handwriting. You lived here twice, once as her, once as you. She didn't understand. Not fully, but something deep within her did. It wasn't reincarnation, it wasn't memory, it was something quieter. A folding of self, of rooms, of names. That night she returned to her own bedroom. The ring still sat in its box, but the photograph had come with her, uninvited, yet not unwelcome. She placed it on the bedside table, faced toward the door, and as she drifted off to sleep, the house exhaled. Long and low, like someone finally letting go. It began with ink on her fingers. Clara woke before dawn. No memory of writing, no paper near the bed, and yet her right hand bore the faded stain of dark ink, like she'd spent the night drafting something forgotten. The photograph still sat on her nightstand, unchanged, but the ring box beside it had been moved, turned ever so slightly, facing the window now. And the brooch, it was still pinned to her collar, though she hadn't worn that sweater to bed. She rose quietly. The house felt softer today, not welcoming, but yielding, like it had grown tired of keeping secrets. She returned to the front room where the journal usually waited, but it wasn't there. Instead, a stack of old envelopes had appeared on the writing desk, unsealed, unlabeled, all in her handwriting. She opened the top one, blank at first, But then the words slowly appeared, as if remembering themselves line by line. You came here for rest, but what you needed was to return. She opened the next. Some houses are not homes, they are memory. And memory, when buried too long, grows its own walls. Clara read until the sun rose behind the clouds. Each letter was hers, written in her hand, but unfamiliar. They spoke in riddles, symbols, soft warnings. The attic is not the highest point. The locked room is not the only one. You forgot her name because it was once your own. She folded them all gently, returning them to their envelopes, then turned to the journal. It was resting on the window seat, bathed in the faintest line of light. Inside, a single note, inked in crimson brown. Tonight, go to the cellar. She hadn't been to the cellar, hadn't even found a door to it. She searched the main hall again, the kitchen, behind the pantry shelves. It wasn't until dusk that she found it. A trap door beneath the rug in the laundry room. Wooden, heavy, worn with use. She paused before opening it. Because some doors don't creak when they're opened. They sigh. And this one did. The steps were stone. The walls? Breathing. She descended slowly, candle held ahead. The air was cooler here. Not damp, just deliberate. And there, in the center of the floor, a desk, identical to the one upstairs, but this one was covered in paper. Hundreds of pages, some handwritten, some burned at the edges, some blank, but folded carefully, like they'd been read 100 times. Clara stepped closer. The candlelight danced across the paper, and in the center of it all, a journal. Not the one she'd used. Another, older, bound in green leather, worn smooth at the edges. She opened it. Every page had been filled. Same writing, same voice, her own. But the dates were wrong. They stretched back over a century. At the very end, a final message. You were always going to come back, even if you didn't remember why. And beneath that, pressed into the paper so faintly it almost disappeared, look behind the mirror. Look beneath the floor. The house remembers, so you don't have to. Clara stood there in silence, among the papers, among the echoes, and in the stillness. She heard a voice, not outside, not above, but within the very walls. Welcome home. She should have felt unease. But Clara didn't. As she stood among the papers, beneath the house, there was no dread, no fear, only recognition. The cellar was not a basement, really. It was too wide, too quiet, too aware. As if the house had shaped this space from memory alone. The desk behind her now felt distant. The papers, like leaves after rain. She stepped past them, further in. A hallway stretched from the far side of the cellar. Not stone, but smooth oak, lit by lamps that hadn't been lit in years. And yet, they glowed, pale yellow, steady as breath. She walked. The walls were lined with portraits, but not of people, of places, rooms she hadn't entered yet. hallways that didn't exist upstairs, a staircase that spiraled downward endlessly. Each painting was framed in rusted brass, each one slightly smudged, as if recently touched. One frame held her attention, a bedroom, the same one from upstairs. But in this portrait, the window was open, and someone was standing just outside it, watching in. Not malevolent, not clear, just present. At the end of the hall, the passage widened, a wooden arch, and beyond it, another room. No door, just a soft curve in the wall that let her in without resistance. This room was round, no corners, no furniture, just a single candle in the center and a mirror on each wall, 6 of them, each slightly different in shape. Oval, rectangle, arched, cracked, fogged, gold-framed. She stepped toward the closest. Her reflection blinked. Only she hadn't. She looked again. The version of herself in the mirror stood still, expressionless. But behind her, in the reflection, was a girl, 10, maybe 12, dressed in pale green, hands folded, watching her. Clara turned around quickly, but the room was empty. The girl was only in the mirror. She checked the next one. This reflection was older, a version of herself she hadn't reached yet. Lines beneath her eyes, a streak of white at her temple. She was smiling, but only just. Each mirror held a version of her. One younger, one older, one frightened, one laughing softly, each one alone, but never untouched. There was always something. A hand on the shoulder, a shadow in the doorway, a letter in hand. By the 6th mirror, Clara wasn't watching anymore. She was listening. The candle in the center of the room flickered, and a voice, soft, dry as parchment, whispered, "You've always lived here, even when you forgot where you were." She backed out of the room slowly, not afraid, but full, as though something once locked had now opened inside her. Not a door, but a memory. The hallway behind her had changed. Now it led up, stone steps, narrow, spiraling like the staircase from the painting. She ascended, step by step. Light dimming behind her, and something like wind rising ahead. When she reached the top, she found herself in the attic, but not her attic. The windows were different, the light slanted sideways, and the floor was marked, chalk lines in a circular pattern. In the center sat the journal, closed, waiting. The attic was quieter than before. Not silent dash, just still in that way old rooms are, as if they're holding their breath, waiting for someone to speak a forgotten truth. The chalk lines on the floor had smudged near the edges, not from dust or time, but from movement, a presence that had traced them over and over, in circles, searching for where they started. The journal sat in the center. Not new, not old, just inevitable. Clara approached it slowly, the candle in her hand fluttering with each step. She knelt, opened the journal to the first page, and there, in soft brown ink, Clara Evelyn Whitlow, written in her own handwriting. But she hadn't written it here. Not yet. Not this version of her. She turned the page. To remember is to return. To return is to become. And becoming means letting go. Page after page, the journal unfolded like memory unstuck from time. It told of the house, of a girl who came too young, of a woman who stayed too long, of a name whispered through floorboards and chimney dust. Not a ghost's name, her own. And then, halfway through the book, a page she didn't expect. A drawing, a face, the same one from the photograph, same soft jaw, same half smile, but the eyes were hers. Drawn with a tenderness only self-knowledge allows. Beneath the image, a single line. She isn't haunting you. She's waiting for you to take her place. Clara placed her hand on the drawing, and for a moment, it was warm. Not heat from the page, but memory flowing in the other direction. Something inside her unlocked, and a name surfaced. Not one she'd read, not one she'd spoken, but one she was. Evelyn, it wasn't her middle name. Not originally, it was her first, and Clara had been the name she chose to forget it. The candle dimmed beside her. She didn't move, just sat there, letting the name settle back into her chest. The attic sighed, the way only wood does when it remembers someone has returned. The wind outside rose softly, and the chalk on the floor began to fade. Not from being wiped away, but from no longer being needed. She looked back at the journal, now closed. But on the cover, etched faintly by time or touch, was the circle. The open one, waiting to be closed. And when she stood, the house felt different. Not heavy, not haunted, just whole. The house was quiet now. Not the kind of quiet that holds its breath, but the kind that follows an answer, after the question has finally been spoken aloud. Clara moved through the hallway slowly, as if the walls were listening, as if every step reminded the floor it had been walked before. The humming door was silent. The grandfather clock remained still at 12:06, and yet she could feel it in the air. Something unfinished, something just beyond the edge of waking. There was one place she hadn't looked, not because she was afraid, but because the house hadn't let her, until now. The narrow hallway beside the linen cupboard. She'd passed it a dozen times, never seeing the end of it. Tonight, the hallway was shorter, and at its end stood a door, unmarked, wooden, softly lit from beneath. She approached without hesitation. The air grew warmer, not fire warm, but held warm, like hands that remember how to comfort. The door opened at her touch. No creak, no resistance, just a slow exhale, as if the room behind it had been waiting for this moment alone. It was a nursery, small, sunless, soft where dust danced in the beam of moonlight slipping through the curtained window. There was a rocking chair in the corner, a shelf of books, a single rattle on the floor carved from dark wood in the shape of a fox. And in the crib, nothing, but the blanket was turned down and the pillow held the impression of something that once rested gently there. Clara stepped forward. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The room remembered. She sat in the rocker and gently touched the mobile overhead. It spun slowly. Wooden moons, tiny stars, a circle at the center, open on one side, the same symbol. Everywhere, always. On the wall hung a framed note, childlike, almost a poem. She left before she arrived. But you remembered her name, and now the house can sleep again. Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time, she felt it, the weight the house had carried. Not grief, not fear, just memory, untended, unspoken, now returned. When she rose to leave, she glanced back once, and in the mirror near the door, a reflection that wasn't hers. Not fully, a girl, a woman, a mother, a memory, all the same face, smiling. The door closed behind her with a hush, and the circle finally felt complete. The house didn't close its doors. It simply rested, and for the first time in what felt like decades, it breathed. Not a draft, not a chill, just the quiet inhale of old walls and the exhale of memory. Finally set down, Clara stood in the foyer, fingers brushing the banister one last time. The light from the stained glass window scattered softly across the floor. The colors no longer fractured, but whole. She looked up the staircase, to the attic, to the room that wasn't hers, to the mirrors that remembered too much, and then down the hall, to the nursery, to the crib that never rocked, to the photograph that always faced the door. Every space now, still, not forgotten, just settled. She turned to leave. The front door opened with ease. No sigh, no whisper, just the hush of welcome, becoming goodbye. Outside, the air was cool. The sky, slate gray with hints of fading blue. A morning not yet born. She stepped out onto the porch, journal in hand. It had closed itself sometime during the night, but the final page had written one more line. You carried her memory, now let it carry you. The brooch still lay on her collar. The ring remained in the box upstairs, where it belonged, where it would wait, if ever needed again. And the circle, the open one, it didn't need to be drawn anymore, because it lived now, in the rhythm of her breath and the echo of her steps and the soft hush of stories that remember you back. Take a breath. Let it settle. The house is still there, and now, so are you. If you're still awake, tell me in the comments. Which moment stayed with you the most? Was it the photograph? The nursery? The quiet note left in the mirror's reflection? I'd love to know, because stories, especially the soft ones, they only truly live when they're shared. You're safe now. There's nothing left to follow you, only dreams. I'll see you again next time, when the house lights flicker on, and something familiar calls you home again. Good night.